Hey everyone, if you like your protagonist to be a little more on the skittish side to downright cowardice, then maybe today's novel is for you. Today we'll be reviewing Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I am your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we are going to be covering the first book in the Discworld series, Color of Magic. That, of course, is Color with you because Terry Pratchett was British. Now, this is the first book in a massive series, and so there's a lot of opinions about it because there's a lot of opinions about the entire disc book world. And everyone that is a fan has their own opinion on this book in particular. But let's dig into a little bit of a synopsis of the book as best we can, considering Discworld is still a bit of a challenge to really explain. There's just too much going on, and there's too much that's just kind of really difficult to fully appreciate. In the Color Magic, we're introduced to Rincewind, who is one of the more important individuals in the whole Discworld universe. He's also one of the most divisive figures. Rincewind is notoriously bad at magic. He is a student at Unseen University, and I believe in one of the footnotes it even says that he's so bad at magic that if he were to die, the net amount of magic in the world would actually increase. He famously cannot do a single spell, yet he has one of the most important spells in all of the universe lodged in his head, which is one of the reasons why he's such an important person for Unseen University to keep track of. On top of that, we get introduced to Two Flowers. Two Flowers is a tourist from some far off land, and Two Flowers comes. In his old world, he was a pretty average guy, but in his home country, there was an abundance of gold that had nothing near the same value that it has in Rincewind's hometown of Ankh-Morpork, where Unseen University is based. And so he brings all sorts of gold to Ankh-Morpork, and with that, a fair amount of trouble. Rincewind is put in charge of protecting Two Flower for a variety of reasons, especially since Two Flower is actually considered a traitor in his hometown. It gets a little complicated, but really it's what sets everyone off on this long adventure, and it quickly turns into a bit more of an epic. And so we have Rincewind and Two Flowers being chased around the Discworld, and they find themselves in all sorts of fascinating situations, including invisible dragons. At one point, they're being forced over the side of the Discworld. They become the ones that are going to help, although they're being offered as sacrifices. They themselves are not the scientists, but they're going to be involved in helping to determine the sex of the great turtle Atuan, on which the four elephants stand on, which is what Discworld is standing on. If you want a little more detail, look at my introduction video to Discworld as a whole, but that's the gist of this first novel. Let's talk about what some people do and don't like about this one. There's a lot of opinions on Rincewind himself. I get it, he's a little bit of a coward. Matter of fact, some people say that his best attribute is his sense of self-preservation, because he himself is very frequently always trying to, stay alive. And so he is very much always running away from trouble and not into it, yet somehow he is constantly finding himself running back into trouble or running into just a completely different set of problems. Two Flower, on the other hand, provides an interesting contrast. Not only does he not have anywhere near the same concerns for self-preservation as Rincewind, he actually just seems to have a sense of invincibility. Not that he has any kind of special powers, but that's the way he approaches this vacation that he's on. And of course, I have to mention Two Flowers' constant companion, which is a piece of luggage known as sapient pierwood, which is this luggage with a bunch of legs, and it appears to be near indestructible, and it usually has these dog-like qualities, showing just the utmost fealty to Two Flowers. And this is actually going to be a recurring character throughout this series. It is the first in the series, and so I think there's elements of Discworld that are very much still being sorted out, even though I don't think that's readily obvious. A lot of the main characters are there from the beginning. Death makes an appearance early on, although his character isn't quite the same as you're going to see throughout the rest of the series. Unseen University and the general attitude of other wizards, and of course Rincewind himself is going to be a recurring protagonist. And the magic system seems to be as about developed in this time period as it is going to be at any other point throughout the series. I think a lot of people that are critical of this first book also feel like the tone is not quite there. And I think specifically they're referring to the tone towards fantasy. All of the books are satire. This first book seems to be more of a satire of fantasy. The later books seem to be using fantasy to satire larger social and economic concerns. And I think that might be a bit of a difference that people are not fully on board with this first book. Some people also argue that this first book is pretty chaotic. Personally, I do enjoy this first book. I actually think the chaos is very much enjoyable. I wouldn't say that I always love chaos, but I think it lends credence to the general approach that Terry Pratchett has to overlapping the two worlds. On top of that, I do like Rincewind. I actually think that the fact that he's always running away is not unsettling to me, or it's not some reason for me to dislike him. I think it's perfectly understandable. It's not like he's running away from saving women and children. He's just running from what he obviously perceives as a threat, and it doesn't always pay out for him. But that being said, not everyone likes Rincewind, and the fact that he is a pretty much useless wizard is probably another reason to not really care for him. If you're a fan of fantasy and you're reading this series because you want some kind of magic in the series, and your main character deliberately can't do any of the magic, well, that could be another reason to not particularly care for him. A big thing that I do think is in this book, early on, from the beginning, that is in all of Terry Pratchett's book, and that is the type of humor. I do know a few things will be added as the series develops. Of course, as you know the characters better, it's easier to make jokes that are based off of those particular characteristics. And on top of that, stuff like recurring jokes, those things that will become an important part of the Discworld series, you obviously can't have from the get-go. But the dry humor, the puns, the approach to wordplay, and just the general way he engages with making humorous comments, that all exists from this very first book. I think it's a reasonable read. That being said, I understand with people that they see a noticeable difference between these first couple books and the later books in the series. And so I could see why you might not love this as much, but I still think it's very much a perfectly enjoyable book. So who would I recommend this book for? Like I said in the introduction to the Discworld series, anyone that is a fan of fantasy and satire, I think would enjoy this. Granted, this is a bit more satirical on fantasy itself and not necessarily a satire of society as a whole. So if that's what you're hoping for, you may not find it in this first book. I also mentioned in my Discworld series introduction that there's a lot of different opinions on exactly how you should approach Discworld. Some people believe that you should do it based off individual protagonist narratives, such as following the witch's narrative or following Death's narrative. Some people think that you can start from the very beginning. I'm a proponent of starting from the very beginning in publication order because, one, I'm always a proponent of doing it that way. But two, I actually like having a bit of diversity between each of the different books. So I don't like reading just one storyline, one after another, especially if I'm dealing with such a big world. I like that we jump around a little. It's the same way in a really big fantasy series when the point of view jumps from chapter to chapter. Obviously, I don't want it too much, but I feel like it's done perfectly fine. However, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone that is looking at 41 books and is saying, I can't read all of that, but I'm a completionist. If you're okay with just reading bits and pieces, or you do want to read all 41 books, then this series just might be for you. I am about halfway through. I very much enjoyed it, and I am not regretting starting it, and I'm certainly not dreading continuing to read it. It has by no means gotten stale or boring to me, and I look forward to reading a new one of these books each month. So that's who I would recommend it for. However, I'm very much interested in seeing what you guys have to say, so please let me know what you guys think in the comments, what kind of difference of opinion you have when it comes to the reading order. Whatever it is, let me know, and of course, like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and until next time, keep those pages turning.